The sun was shining bright the day we arrived, the kind of golden warmth that made the world feel perfect, like nothing bad could ever happen. We were 5 friends, me, Jake, Mia, Lauren and Tyler, crammed into Jake's old SUV. Windows rolled, down, music blasting, all of us laughing louder than the wind. The beach we were heading to wasn't listed on any travel guide or blog. It was a hidden gem Jake stumbled upon while scrolling through some obscure forum late one night. Private, untouched, and completely isolated. It sounded like a dream, and we were all eager to escape our lives for a while. No phones, no drama, no responsibilities. Just sand, sea, and silence. The road to the beach was rough, more like a dirt trail than a proper path, lined with overgrown grass and gnarled trees that reached out like they were trying to pull us back. Every now and then, we'd hit a bump that made our heads knock against the car ceiling, but we were too excited to care. Jake kept talking about how it was going to be the best summer ever, and we all believed him. We were young, free, and hungry for something different. The promise of adventure hung in the air like the scent of salt from the distant ocean. When we finally arrived, the sight took our breath away. The beach stretched endlessly on both sides. The sand so white it looked almost silver in the afternoon sun. Waves rolled in gently, crashing with a peaceful rhythm that seemed to sync with our heartbeats. The house we rented stood right at the edge of the dunes, a small, weather-beaten cottage with peeling paint and shuttered windows. It looked old, but charming, the kind of place that felt like it held secrets from another time. There were no other houses nearby, no cars, no people, just us and the sea. Inside, the cottage was better than we expected. There were 3 small bedrooms, a creaky kitchen with mismatched furniture, and a living room that smelled faintly of the ocean. Everything looked outdated, like it hadn't been touched in years, but it was clean enough. Mia claimed the room with the window facing the shore, and the rest of us picked our spots without fuss. We unpacked, argued over who got the top bunk, then raced down to the water like kids set free for the first time. We spent the whole day swimming, sunbathing, and exploring the shoreline. The water was warm, the waves playful. Tyler brought a frisbee, and we tossed it around until our arms were sore. Lauren collected seashells and lined them up in the sand like tiny trophies. We built a fire that evening, roasting marshmallows and telling dumb ghost stories that none of us took seriously. Laughter echoed across the beach, blending with the sound of waves and crackling wood. For the first time in what felt like forever, we were completely present. No distractions, no deadlines, no pressure. Just the 5 of us, surrounded by nothing but nature. As night fell, the stars began to appear, one by one, until the sky was glittering with 1,000 tiny lights. It was the kind of night that made you forget about the world beyond the beach. We lay on our backs in the sand, shoulder to shoulder, watching the sky and talking about everything and nothing. Our worries melted away, and all that existed was the moment. We didn't know it then, but that perfect day would be the last normal one we'd ever have. It was the 3rd day when we saw it. The sun was beginning to dip low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the sand and turning the sky into streaks of gold and crimson. The air had cooled just enough to make the breeze feel like a soft whisper against our skin. We had spent most of the afternoon lying on our towels, half asleep from the heat, until Jake suggested we take a walk down the beach just to see how far it went. None of us had explored past the dunes yet. The shoreline seemed endless, curling, around into a distant bend, and curiosity pushed us forward. We kicked off our flip-flops and walked barefoot, the sand still warm from the sun. Tyler ran ahead, skipping rocks into the waves and laughing like a kid. Lauren and Mia trailed behind, talking in low voices, occasionally stopping to snap photos. Jake walked beside me, quiet for once, his eyes scanning the horizon like he was looking for something. It felt peaceful, surreal even, the kind of evening that made the world feel too beautiful to be real. Then Tyler stopped. We were maybe half a mile from the cottage when he froze in place and pointed toward the dunes. At first, I didn't see it. It was mostly hidden behind a wall of tall beach grass, its dark outline blending into the slope of the land. But as we got closer, its shape became clear. A cabin, old, weathered, and completely out of place. It wasn't like the cozy little house we were staying in. This one looked abandoned, almost forgotten by time. The wood was dark and splintered, the windows fogged over or cracked, and the roof sagged, slightly like it couldn't bear its own weight anymore. Jake immediately wanted to check it out. Of course he did. He lived for this kind of thing. The weird, the unexplained, the thrill of doing something he probably shouldn't. Mia hesitated, her hand gripping Lauren's wrist. She said she didn't like the feeling of it, said it looked like something out of a horror movie. But Jake just laughed and pushed forward through the grass, and Tyler followed close behind. I glanced at the girls and shrugged, then walked after them, not wanting to be left behind. The cabin door was slightly ajar, hanging crooked on rusted hinges. It creaked when Jake pushed it open, the sound slicing through the quiet like a warning. The inside was even darker than I expected. The only light came from a few slivers breaking through the boards nailed over the windows, casting strange patterns across the floor. Dust hung in the air, thick and unmoving. It smelled like mold and metal, like old rain soaked into forgotten wood. We stepped inside slowly, one by one, our footsteps muted on the worn floorboards. The cabin was just one room, with a collapsed cot in the corner, an old wooden chair tipped on its side, and a cabinet that looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. But the thing that caught our attention, the thing none of us could stop staring at, was the wall. It was covered in photographs, hundreds of them, all different sizes, all in black and white or faded colour. They were pinned or taped to the wall with no pattern, just chaos. Most showed people smiling at the beach. Families, couples, groups of friends. At first, it almost seemed charming, like someone had just loved capturing memories. But as we looked closer, something felt wrong. The photos were too old, too many, decades apart, and each one had a date written on it, scrawled in ink below the image, the same date, repeated over and over. We stood in silence for a long time, just staring at them. The air in the cabin felt colder than it had outside. Jake reached out to touch one of the photos, and Lauren stopped him. None of us were smiling anymore. Tyler moved toward the back of the room and called for us to look at something, but his voice sounded distant, like it was echoing from far away. The wall was unlike anything we had ever seen before. It stretched from one end of the room to the other, every inch of it plastered with old, curling photographs that looked like they'd been collected over generations. Some were yellowed at, the corners. Others cracked in the middle as if they had been folded and unfolded too many times. The images stared back at us, people frozen in moments of happiness. At first glance, it looked innocent, just pictures of strangers on vacations, people smiling with the ocean in the background, families holding hands in front of beach bonfires, couples mid-laugh as they splashed water on each other. Ordinary, cheerful snapshots. But the more we stared, the more the atmosphere began to shift. There was something deeply unsettling about the way the photos were arranged. They weren't in frames or lined up neatly. They were haphazardly pinned with rusted thumbtacks, overlapping each other in strange angles. And all of them, every single one, had a date written underneath. At first, we thought it was just the year the picture was taken. But then we noticed something that made our stomachs twist. Every date was exactly the same. Not just the day and month, but the year too. July 14th. Dozens, maybe hundreds of photos, all stamped with that same exact date, even though the people in them clearly came from different decades. Some wore vintage swimsuits from the 60s. Some had hairstyles from the 80s, and a few looked almost recent, like they could have been taken last summer. But no matter how different the people looked, or how faded or sharp the pictures were, they all bore the same haunting detail. July 14th. Mia was the first to break the silence. She whispered that it didn't make sense, that it had to be some Kind of weird art installation or prank. But no one responded. We were all too busy trying to process what we were seeing. Tyler leaned in closer to one of the photographs. It showed a group of teenagers, maybe our age, sitting around a bonfire, with beers in their hands, smiling at the camera. The boy in the middle had a backwards cap and a crooked grin, his arms slung over a girl who looked like she'd just told a joke. Beneath the photo, the same date was scrawled again, July 14th. Jake moved down the line of pictures, running his fingers over the images without touching them. He was muttering under his breath. Something about coincidences and timelines, but his voice was tight, like he didn't believe what he was saying. Lauren had stepped back by then, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, eyes darting from photo to photo as if she expected one of the faces to look back at her. There was a thickness in the air that hadn't been there before, a kind of pressure, like the room itself was holding its breath. Then we saw something that made us all go quiet. Near the bottom of the wall, behind a small stack of overlapping photos, Jake carefully peeled one away and froze. It was a picture of a girl standing alone in front of a sand dune, her face partially shadowed by the sun. She looked eerily familiar. Her clothes weren't vintage, her hairstyle was modern, and the resolution of the photo was sharper than the rest. Underneath her, the same date, July 14th. Lauren reached for the photo beside it and pulled it loose. Another teenager. Another modern outfit. Another smile that didn't reach the eyes. The pictures were getting newer. Each step down the wall showed people who looked more and more like they could have been walking past us on the beach just days ago. A creeping sense of recognition was beginning to grow in the room, like we were all slowly coming to the same conclusion, but no one wanted to be the first to say it out loud. We left the cabin that evening without saying much. No one wanted to talk about what we saw, but it lingered in the air like smoke. The photographs, the dates, the uneasiness, it all clung to us, quietly seeping into our mood. Even Jake, who always brushed things off with a laugh, had gone quiet. The sky was already darkening as we walked back along the beach, and for the first time since we arrived, the waves didn't sound peaceful. They sounded distant, almost like they were trying to drown something out. Tyler kept glancing over his shoulder, like he thought someone was behind us. At one point, he stopped and turned completely around, staring into the growing darkness. But when we asked what he was doing, he just shook his head. The cottage lights were still glowing faintly when we returned, a soft yellow flicker that should have felt welcoming. Instead, it reminded me of a lighthouse warning ships away from crashing into the rocks. Inside, we tried to distract ourselves. Jake made sandwiches, Mia curled up with a book she didn't actually read, and Lauren kept scrolling through the photos on her phone. Tyler sat near the window, watching the beach through the curtain gap. I sat on the floor, pretending to be interested in a card game none of us really wanted to play. It felt like something had shifted in the air, like the beach wasn't just ours anymore, like we'd walked into something we weren't meant to find. Around midnight, Tyler stood up suddenly. He said he needed some air, and before we could stop him, he grabbed his hoodie and walked out onto the porch. We heard the screen door creak and slam shut behind him. Jake called after him, but Tyler didn't answer. A few minutes passed, then more. Jake muttered something about checking on him, but Mia told him to wait. Maybe Tyler just needed space. He was always the quiet one, the one who didn't like to be crowded. We gave him the benefit of the doubt. 20 minutes later, Jake finally went outside. He came back alone, said Tyler wasn't there. We assumed he'd wandered down to the shore or maybe gone back toward the cabin. Jake grabbed a flashlight and went searching, while Lauren and I combed the dunes in the other direction. Mia stayed behind in case Tyler came back on his own, but he didn't. The beach was empty. The waves were louder now, crashing hard against the shore, and the moonlight made everything look silver and sharp. We called his name over and over, our voices vanishing into the wind. I remember that rising panic, the way it crept up my spine, slow at first, then all at once. This wasn't like him. He didn't just disappear. Eventually, We all met back at the cottage, breathless and confused. Jake's flashlight was flickering, and Lauren had sand all over her jeans from falling while climbing a dune. Mia looked pale, clutching her phone in both hands. We waited. We stayed up the whole night, hoping he'd walk through the door, maybe laughing about how he scared us, maybe holding some weird shell or seaweed to make us jump. But that moment never came. The next morning, his shoes were still by the door, his hoodie still draped over the porch chair. His phone was in the kitchen, exactly where he left it when he went out. It was like he had vanished without a trace. We didn't know what to do. We debated calling the police, but we had no signal, no internet, no way to reach anyone. Jake suggested driving into town, but none of us knew exactly where the closest town even was. The road that brought us here felt longer now, unfamiliar and winding in our memories. Then Mia said something that made my skin go cold. She asked if we should go back to the cabin. Maybe Tyler had returned there for some reason. Maybe he was looking for answers too. Jake didn't hesitate. Lauren shook her head, but followed. I looked back once before leaving the porch. Something about the stillness of the beach felt wrong, like the waves had stopped watching and started listening. We went back to the cabin just after noon. The sun was blazing overhead, but the air felt cooler near the dunes, almost unnaturally so. No one said much as we walked, our feet dragging in the sand, our eyes scanning the horizon for any trace of Tyler. It felt like we were retracing something forbidden, like every step was an invitation to something we didn't understand. The grass near the cabin was even taller than before, swaying in the breeze like it was whispering to itself. The place looked darker now, the wood grayer, the shadows longer. Even though it was the middle of the day, it was the same cabin, but something about it had changed. We stood at the entrance, staring at the door that still hung crooked on its hinges. Jake reached out and pushed it open, and it groaned louder than I remembered, as if the cabin itself was protesting. We stepped inside, and instantly, that cold, metallic smell returned. The photographs were still there, plastered all over the walls, unmoved. But now in the center of the room, something was different. There was a new photo pinned right in the middle of the wall. It was of Tyler. None of us spoke for several seconds. The picture showed him standing just outside the cabin, hands in his pockets, staring off toward the dunes. His expression was blank, almost peaceful, but the image was so recent it chilled me. He was wearing the same hoodie he had on when he left the cottage the night before. Underneath his picture was the same scrawled handwriting, the same cursed date, July 14th. Lauren backed away first. Her face went pale, and she turned sharply, muttering that she couldn't be in there. Jake stared at the picture for a long time, then reached up and pulled it off the wall. Beneath it was another photo. This one showed all of us. Me, Jake, Lauren, Mia, and Tyler, walking along the beach. The shot looked like it had been taken from behind the dunes, like someone had been watching us. We didn't remember anyone else being there. We were supposed to be alone. Beneath that photo were more, each more recent than the last. One of us sitting around the bonfire. One of Lauren combing the beach for shells. One of Jake carrying a bag of groceries from the car. All taken without our knowledge. All dated July 14th. Panic started to set in. Mia began flipping through the photos, frantically searching for something that made sense. She pulled away another layer and gasped. There, tucked behind a black and white image of a family from decades ago, was a new stack of photos. Still sealed, still glossy. They hadn't even been put up yet. Jake grabbed one and looked at it, then passed it to me. It was a photo of me, standing on the porch of our rental cottage. I didn't even remember the moment being taken. Then Jake pulled out another, this time of Mia, asleep on the couch, a blanket halfway down her legs, one of Lauren brushing her teeth in the bathroom mirror. The photos were recent, taken within the last 24 hours, maybe even the last few hours. Someone had been watching us, photographing us, collecting us. Lauren started crying quietly, covering, her mouth with her hand. Jake ripped a handful of photos off the wall and threw them to the ground. Dust scattered everywhere, but beneath the chaos, one thing became terrifyingly clear. These weren't just random snapshots. They were records, evidence, a timeline that we were now a part of. The stack of unused photos was still thick. That meant more were yet to be added. More moments, more memories we hadn't even lived through yet. We didn't return to the cottage right away. After seeing those photos, none of us wanted to be inside four walls. We walked back toward the beach in silence, our feet moving out of instinct more than choice. The sun was starting to dip again, and the shadows on the sand stretched long and thin. The ocean didn't look blue anymore. It looked steel grey, like something cold was pushing its way to the surface. Lauren kept rubbing her arms even though the temperature hadn't dropped. Jake was quiet, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his eyes scanning the dunes like he expected to see someone standing there. Mia walked with her head down, her hair covering her face, her mouth pressed tight like she was holding something in. We sat by the fire pit, even though we didn't light it. There was still some charred wood left over from the night before, but no one wanted to strike a match. Everything felt too still. The wind had died down, and there were no birds, no crashing waves, no rustling grass, just silence. It was the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It felt crowded, like something invisible was standing just outside the circle we'd unknowingly made. Jake finally spoke. He said it out loud, what we were all thinking but none of us wanted to admit. That Tyler wasn't just missing, that the photographs were showing us something that hadn't happened yet, or had happened, just not to us. He said he thought the date meant something. That July 14th wasn't just a coincidence. It was the pattern, a cycle, a loop we were caught in without knowing. Mia shook her head and said it was impossible, that things like that don't happen in real life. But even she didn't sound convinced. Lauren got up and walked toward the shoreline. Her footsteps were slow, like she was trying to listen to something underneath the sand. I followed her after a minute. We stood at the water's edge and looked out at the sea. It was calm again, almost glassy, but it didn't feel peaceful. It felt like the world was holding its breath. Lauren asked me if I remembered the photos that showed people from different eras, all smiling, all frozen in some perfect moment. She said maybe that's why they all looked so calm. Maybe they didn't know what was coming. Back at the fire pit, Jake was flipping through the stack of unused photographs again. He stopped at one, stared at it for a long time, then passed it to Mia. Her face turned white, and she didn't say anything, just handed it to me. It was a photo of all four of us, sitting right there, around the fire pit. Same clothes, same positions, same expressions. It was like someone had taken the picture just seconds ago. But none of us had a camera. None of us remembered anyone near us. Underneath the photo, the same familiar scrawl, July 14th. We looked around instinctively, our eyes searching the dunes, the trees, the porch of the cottage, but there was no one. At least no one we could see. It didn't matter anymore. Whoever, or whatever, was watching us didn't need to be close. It was already here, had always been here. Jake stood up and said we needed to leave. Not in the morning. Now. Lauren nodded quickly. Mia looked like she wanted to protest, but couldn't bring herself to say the words. We grabbed our bags without even packing properly. Phones, chargers, snacks. None of it mattered anymore. Jake said he remembered a side road we passed when we first arrived, hidden behind a grove of trees. He said if we took it, we might be able to get back to the highway faster. We didn't lock the cottage behind us. We didn't look back. As we reached the edge of the clearing, something caught Lauren's eye, and she froze in place. There, hanging from one of the trees near the trail, was another photo. It was pinned to the bark with a rusted nail, fluttering slightly in the breeze. She pulled it down with shaking hands and turned it over. It was a picture of the back of our heads as we walked away,